Thanks for the God Save the Queen this morning. That was very special. It's also special that we have the choir back in the house. After 2.5 years of their sabbatical, it's good to have them back. Good morning. Welcome to the North Chapel. I'm Bob Williamson, service coordinator for today's service. I joined the North Chapel more than a dozen years ago because this is a church that walks its talk and does it every day. It still does, from adopting an orphanage in Cambodia to inspiring change that changed the world kids, sustainable Woodstock, Bookstock, East End Park, and so many other projects. Please turn off your cell phones. I want to welcome any visitors and invite you to sign our guest book that's in the back there. Spiritual exploration for our children will happen in the parlors with Chloe Powell this morning. A little later, we'll sing the children out. We have a full roster of announcements that you'll see in our order of service today. There are a couple I want to highlight. I'm told that there will be a plunge, and I think Leon will have a few more details about that. We have our dinners that are coming up, I think pizza dinners. There are two that I especially want to highlight. This coming Saturday, September 17th at 11 a.m., we'll be holding a memorial service for Wendy Smith, a smiling dynamo of this congregation who died about 1.5 years ago. Wendy was just truly remarkable, a tremendous advocate for the Woodstock food shelf, a poet, a dog lover, a photographer of many events here. When something really needed to get done, Wendy showed up with sleeves rolled up, ready to work. We really miss her. Then on Saturday, September 24th, Leon is giving a TED Talk at Billings Farm on how we commit ourselves to our highest hopes and aspirations while challenging the barriers and impediments that hold us back. The Vermont Standard had a big article about Leon's TED Talk back in late August. Tickets are available at tinyurl.com/y3u9uea6. I'm sure you got all of that. I plan to go and hope you will too, and I'll have this if you have any questions about that. And I think Leon had a couple more announcements he wanted to give before we sing our opening hymn, This Is Our Song, which is something we sing every Sunday ever since the beginning of the horrible invasion of Russia into the Ukraine. Leon?
Good morning, everyone. Just a couple of things. One is one of my favorite memories. For the first couple of years I was here was Prue coming down in her beautiful hat with the flowers, announcing circle dinners. For those of you who may not know, circle dinners were gatherings of maybe 8 to 10 people or so, hosted by different members of the congregation, and we would gather in small groups to have conversations and get to know one another a little bit better. COVID stopped that for obvious reasons, and we haven't really restarted it yet, but we have the semblance, the shadow of what Prue created before with the circle dinner that's coming up this Tuesday. I hope that you've already RSVP'd to Joanne. Let her know if you're still interested in coming. The list, I understand, is growing a little bit larger, but we'll be able to handle it, whatever it is.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yes, Mary.
80% chance of thundershower.
Well, there's a 90% chance that there will be a large tent in the backyard for a memorial service that happens here. So I think we'll be fortunate. If not, we may get rained out. Joanne, do you have a question too?
People to bring hot or
Nope, I'm going to be cooking. Please bring beverages. That's helpful. I will create a tofu vegetarian option, make a salad, and then cook something in the fire that I'm not going to tell you about. The second thing is I've got my green shirt on, which is a signal. I've got the black shirt on, which is a jacket on, which is a signal, and the white pants, which means that it's plunge day. For the third year in a row, on the weekend of September 11, it happens to be the day of September 11, we head out to Silver Lake after church, and in our clothes, fall into beautiful life, just plunge into the lake. I will be glad to do it alone in our name. I will also be thrilled for anybody who wants to join me in this ridiculousness. We filmed the two previous ones, and we'll film this last one. The last thing I want to say is this is our song when we sing it. It's an exercise of compassion, empathy, and connection. So we've been singing it for those for the troubles that we're seeing in Ukraine since the conflict began some months ago. But really, truly, it extends from where we are and who we are to everywhere else in the world. So everyone who's suffering right now, those who are in Somalia, who are suffering from famine, those who are in Pakistan, who are struggling with flood, as 1/3 of the nation is underwater. Wherever there is trouble, we can gather up the good spirit in places that are safe and whole and send it to where it needs to be. So I would ask that we invest that energy into our singing of the hymn this morning.
Today is September the 11th, the 21st anniversary of 9/11. I'll share a personal reminiscence of that day later, but first I want my opening words to be about 8/6, August the 6th, 1974, the day Philippe Petit, the high priest of the high wire, walked across a steel cable strung between the Twin Towers in New York City and dazzled onlookers 1,350 feet below. Philippe's picture is on the cover of today's order of service. You can see it right there. I had the good fortune of going up to the top of the World Trade Center in 1978, a quarter of a mile in the sky at dusk, just as traffic lights below lit up. Fifth Avenue looked like a river of molten gold pouring down a deep canyon. I don't know how you feel on the edge of a great height. It can be unsettling. Famous surfer Buzzy Trent said, "Big waves aren't measured in feet and inches. They're measured in increments of fear." But when Philippe Petit saw the Twin Towers being built, monoliths looming over Manhattan, he knew what he must do. He was a performance artist who conquered tightropes above Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris and the Sydney Harbour Bridge in Australia. He lived his life weighing odds and calculating the future and preparing for ultimate tests. Philippe says he'd calculated the distance he'd walked during all his performances, and all his practice sessions had added up to some 40,000 kilometers, roughly the circumference of the Earth. I focus on Philippe Petit not to diminish the profound tragedy of 9/11, but to consider the triumph of human imagination over seemingly impossible challenges. We all need balance in our lives as we navigate our way through contradictions in our path. As we recall 9/11, I invite you to remember Philippe Petit's remarkable feat. While there are profound sorrows stemming from 9/11, know there are also towering joys in this life. As Philippe says, balance, the bond that seals body to mind, is essential to life as air and water. We cannot live without balance. At the sound of the gong, close your eyes and invite the call. 9/11 is one of those monumental moments that jolts you like an earthquake and gets seared into your memory forever, like President Kennedy's assassination. You remember where you were when you first learned of the planes flying into the Twin Towers. Joan and I were on a road trip to Pittsburgh and Detroit to see games in new major league ballparks. As you might have guessed, those games were canceled. We were glued to the car radio all morning. We stopped for lunch at a restaurant in Amish country, packed to the rafters with folks nervously talking. You felt their anxiety sweep over you in waves of words. Their chatter echoes to this day like the sound of the ocean in a seashell. I bought a postcard in the gift shop of an Amish barn raising. I thought its image showed a way forward, a community coming together to build something for the common good. We headed on to Pittsburgh, hearing of the crashes at the Pentagon and in nearby Shanksville, Pennsylvania. A dark uncertainty knotted in my gut, so at odds with the pastoral green hillsides. We entered a dark tunnel and emerged in bright sunlight to a majestic bridge leading to Pittsburgh. It looked like Oz, with glass and steel skyscrapers sparkling in the distance. Although it was rush hour, the streets were eerily deserted. It wasn't until the next day that I really began to exhale. While touring a local museum, I saw one of Fred Rogers' sweaters. Mr. Rogers' neighborhood originated in Pittsburgh, from which he validated generations of children with authentic acts of kindness. I knew what he meant to my kids, and seeing Fred's sweater began to untie that dark knot. 2 weeks later, I bought a sweater of my own from a street vendor in Chicago. I brought it here today. It felt like the right thing to do. Winston Churchill once said, "We make a living by what we get. We make a life by what we give." The morning offering will now be received.
Like a bird on the wire, like a drunk in a midnight choir, I have tried in my own way to be free. A bird on the wire. You know, there was a cartoon published some years ago, 3 frames as I remember. In the first frame, there were several birds perched on the wire in between 2 wooden telephone poles. In the second image, it's exactly the same, except the telephone wire is missing. And the birds are just now floating where they had been perching in the previous frame. In the third frame, the chattiest bird leads over to the nearest neighbor and in confession says, "You know, I gotta tell you, I still don't understand this new wireless technology." Good morning. I was going for the groan, just so you know. And good Sunday. I hope that this new day finds you well. The title of this morning's reflection is "The Clouds of Our Unknowing." These words are borrowed from a book about centering prayer, or contemplative prayer, that was written by an anonymous author in the 14th century and was called The Cloud of Unknowing. I first heard this language in seminary back in Berkeley, not in connection with this book, but in connection to the biblical story of Moses out at Mount Sinai. I look forward to reading The Cloud at some point, but this morning's reflection has less to do with centering prayer and more to do with tightrope walking, more to do with being a bird on the wire, more to do with finding and keeping our balance at great and dizzying heights. James Baldwin writes, "I felt myself in the middle of a turning wheel. It felt like that as one might feel at a circus, with all the shifting and multicolored and terrifying lights, with all of that sound, or as one might feel on a tightrope, with all the lights and sounds and people mortally, hideously, and unbelievably beneath. everything depending on what one can achieve of balance. Now, he had no idea what was happening to him, not James Baldwin, but Moses. Moses didn't know what was happening to him. How on earth and how in heaven could he possibly have known, having never done such an incredible thing before, having never climbed a mountain in order to see the face of God? In Exodus, it's explained that the people wandered in the wilderness until they came to a mountain that they called Sinai. It is written, "Then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, 'You shall say to the house of Jacob and tell the Israelites, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I bore you on eagle's wings. God said, if you obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be treasured among all the possessions of the earth.' So Moses went before the elders and shared what God had said on the mountain, and the elders and the people responded as one. They all agreed. Then the Lord said to Moses, 'I am going to come to you in a dense cloud, in order that the people may hear when I speak, and so trust you ever after.'" According to the rest of the passage, one has to prepare for such a thing. One has to get good and ready before having the holy encounter, the theophany, as they say, or the appearance of God. Without the right preparation, there can be consequences, they say. Appearing in my Bible like a warning from a cosmic Surgeon General, as it were. There's a special note there's a commentary about Exodus, and it reads, quote, "The appearance of God is dangerous for human beings, requiring careful preparation and safeguards because of divine holiness. Holiness means that God is separate from humanity in two ways. First, God's sacred character is separate from the profane world of creation. But sin introduces a second separation, that between pure and impure. The result of this twofold separation is that God, who is sacred and pure, becomes dangerous in the presence of humans who are not only profane, but also impure." The language is striking, isn't it? The warning concludes, "Inappropriate contact with God." I cracked up when I read that. I don't know why. I just love that line. "Inappropriate contact with God carries the threat of death. Proper preparation includes ritual consecration and cleansing of the people, the washing of clothes, and the leaving of a clear boundary between the mountain and the people." I grew up thinking that this language was heavy-handed. I grew up thinking that God was always serene and only appeared in ways that were safe and gentle. I wanted that to be the case at any rate. It's still hard for me to think of God as dangerous. It seems incongruous somehow. I've been resistant to the preparatory rituals. I've always been reactive about them, doubtful and skeptical, sometimes rebellious even. I got over it with the help of a Sufi teacher from Afghanistan, Sheikh Yasir Chadli. I have shared stories about him before. In preparation for the recitation of the Fatiha at the beginning of the Muslim prayer, Sheikh Yasir taught me about the ritual called wudu. Wudu is the Islamic procedure of the cleansing of the body. It is a ritual of purification. It is an act of ablution. It's beautiful, but I still was doubtful, unconvinced of its usefulness. Not disrespectful, but doubtful. So I asked Yasir about it. I asked my teacher for help in understanding. And I shared my resistance from my liberal Unitarian Universalist New Jersey point of view. And I said, "Yasir, can I ask you a question? I'm struggling with something." And he said, "Yes, of course." He invited my questions. I had the sense that he deeply loved me, that he deeply loved all of his students, but that could be my projection. I don't know. What I know for sure is that I loved him very, very much. So I start talking. I tell him that God, the God that I imagine, is not so orderly or so uptight, I said. as to require me to be perfectly clean before God can hear my prayer. I tell him that the God that I imagine can accept me as I am and does not need these cleansing rituals. I thought I had him cornered, but I really didn't. He said, I don't think that the holy needs these rituals, Leon. I think that you need them. That got me. I realized immediately that I had mistaken my personal conviction for faith. I mistook my hubris for the holy. He helped me to see that. Peter told us, be clothed in humility, for God resisteth the proud. Matthew said, blessed are the merciful, but somehow I had missed the point. It was good to realize that. Understanding what the holy is not helps me to understand and to see things more clearly, more dearly, and more nearly. That was helpful to me. It was what I didn't know, and maybe what I really couldn't know about the holy that ended up strengthening my habits of belief. Country blues artist Kelly Jo Phelps sings, hold my knees on the ground, Lord, help my faith. My disbelief is killing me, and I could surely use your grace. That line just touches me. I'm powerfully affected by it, powerfully affected by the idea of being killed off by my own disbelief. And it's cool and so fascinating. Maybe because I learned to be so skeptical about spiritual things. I don't regret my cynicism. I respect my doubt. I cherish it. But I'm also aware that my attitude does not always serve me well. Maybe it's not such a bad idea for us to prepare for spiritual things, whether we are climbing up the mountain or gently washing our good souls clean or walking into heaven here on earth like Pettit did. Into the darkness, we used to sing, prepare ye the way of the Lord. Back in the 70s, when Godspell first came out, I wonder if Pettit did as well. Philip Pettit walked into heaven back in 1974. He didn't ascend to heaven. He walked there on his own. He did so by using 6 tools of preparation: passion, tenacity, faith, improvisation, inspiration, and of course, the most essential tool of all. I love the way he chose to tell the story. His words were these: intuition is a tool essential in my life. On the high wire, within months, I was able to master all the tricks that they do at the circus. I was starting to invent my own moves and starting to bring them to perfection, but nobody wanted to hire me. So I started putting a wire up in secret and performing without permission. Notre Dame, the Sydney Harbor Bridge, the World Trade Center. I developed a certitude, a faith that convinced me that I will safely get to the other side. Without that faith, he would have been unable to take the first step. Intuition is his most essential tool. Intuition is the ability to understand something immediately without the need for conscious reasoning. It's something that we know from instinct. It's from the part of us that is still wild. Somehow, Philip Pettit knew that he could do this wild and crazy thing. He knew that he could walk across the sky 1,350 feet above the streets of New York City. He spent his lifetime preparing. Nonetheless, he said, on the top of the World Trade Center, my first step was terrifying. I lift the balancing pole. I approach the edge. I step over the beam. I put my left foot on the cable. The weight of my body rested on my right leg, anchored to the flank of the building. Shall I ever so slightly shift my weight to the left? My right leg will be unburdened. My right foot will be free to meet the wire. On one side, a massive mountain, a life I know. And on the other side, the universe of the clouds, so full of the unknown that we think it's empty. At my feet, the path to the North Tower, 60 yards of wire rope. It's a straight line which sags, which sways, which vibrates, which rolls on itself, which is ice, which is 3 tons tight and ready to explode, ready to swallow me. An inner howl assails me, a wild longing to flee, but it's too late. The wire is ready. Decisively, my other foot sets itself onto the cable. I am terrified just reading this. I have a fear of heights. Is anyone with me on this? I had a friend once explain to me, he said quite rationally, I really don't think that it's the height of things that you're afraid of. He said, I think you're really afraid of falling down and getting hurt or possibly even dying. And I reassured my friend with great clarity. I said, oh, I'm afraid of that as well. But Philip Petit, the high wire artist, he was not afraid. He said so himself. He was utterly terrified. He and I have that feeling in common. He and I differ, though, in how we choose to act on what we feel, in how we choose to take the next step. For instance, I do not choose to walk across the high wire. It's not my thing. He, on the other hand, he feels deeply compelled to do such things. Both of us are listening. Both of us are students of the music of intuition. With his first steps, he recalled that on one side there was a mass of a mountain, the life that he knew, and on the other side there was a universe of clouds, a universe that was so full of the unknown that we think that it's empty. Philip Petit was able to step into the clouds of unknowing with certainty, even though the clouds themselves were uncertain. He said, faith is what replaces doubt in my dictionary. Faith is what replaces doubt in my spiritual dictionary as well, but it does not lead me out across the high wire. The faith that I know does not always surrender to gravity, but it respects gravity. Does not often surrender to gravity, but I'm still not walking across that wire. I simply have not been properly prepared. The faith I know leads me into mystery, and that's just as terrifying sometimes. Today is Sunday, September the 11th, in the good year of 2022. This is the 21st anniversary of a tragedy we refer to as 9/11. The fury of that day, for that fury, the towers that a tightrope artist used to walk into heaven no longer exist. That world that used to be has changed. You say 9/11 and something falls within us each time that it's mentioned. Some of us may be feeling this falling right now. If our hearts are open and out and exposed, if they are in that touchable place. It's hard to keep the heart out there for too long a time, out where it can be touched or tapped or tipped over or tumbled or torn. Perhaps too well men know how to prevent such things from happening, even in the face of catastrophe, perhaps especially in the face of catastrophe. Do you know Keith Olbermann? Do you know that name? Keith Olbermann is a sportscaster. He's very good at his job. He's pretty well known, so he's familiar to some of us. In 2001, he was living in New York City, and back then he told this story. He said that after the Twin Towers fell, quote, the following Monday, when Wall Street opened, the streets were ringed with men with machine guns. There was still smoke pouring out of the pyre of the World Trade Center. After about 4 hours of walking around downtown, a cop recognizes me and he says, "How you doing, Keith?" I said, I'm all right. How are you? He said, I'm worried. I said, I'm worried too. He said, I'm worried about the Mets. And I sort of snapped out of it and I said, you're worried about the Mets? And he said, yeah. well, the season resumes tonight, and I'm really worried. They're in Pittsburgh, and do you think they have enough to get back into the pennant race? I mean, they were doing so well. Do you think they can catch the Braves? And I said, how on earth could this possibly matter? We were standing there, and there was smoke coming up from behind us, and he says, it doesn't matter. Of course it doesn't matter, but I've just lost 300 friends. It doesn't matter. He says, but tonight at 7 o'clock, and for all of the rest of today, I can look forward to 7 o'clock, when I can put my feet up and pretend that it does matter. Heroes push us up. They lift us up to the next level. Heroes come in all types and sizes: baseball players, tightrope walkers, poets and presidents, writers and first responders, comedians and historians. Sportscasters, actually, in this case. I'm now a big fan of Keith Olbermann. In late October of 2001, 2 weeks after the American military forces had entered Afghanistan, Howard Zinn, the highly respected and world-renowned historian, spoke at the University of Vermont up in Burlington. He shared an interesting story, and I share it with you now. He said, I was talking with my barber the other day, because we always discuss world politics. He's totally politically unpredictable, as most barbers are, you see. He said, Howard, he said, you and I disagree on many things, but on one thing we agree: war solves nothing. It just poisons everyone who engages in it. What do you think of Howard's idea? I can tell you what I think about it. I don't find it bitter. Some people do find it bitter, but I do not. I think it demonstrates a kind of bravery that is rare and spiritually beautiful. I think it demonstrates a kind of faith in a future that unfolds with uncertainty. I think that his idea is the product of incredible preparation. As a bomber in World War II, he was given a terrible order and he followed it. Howard Zinn was born in 1922, so he would have been 100 years old this August. He was a bomber. He volunteered to fly as a bombardier in World War II. The order that he received was to bomb a village, not in Germany, but in France. As he explained, we thought that our bombing missions were over. The war was about to come to an end. This was April of 1945. The war ended in May. This was a few weeks before the war was over, and everybody knew that it was going to be over. And there was a little pocket of German soldiers hanging around in this little town of Royan on the Atlantic coast of France. And the Air Force decided to bomb them. 1,200 heavy bombers, and I was one of them, flew over this little town. I did it like most soldiers do, unthinkingly, mechanically. I was thinking, we're on the right side, they're on the wrong side, so we can do what we want. And therefore, whatever we do is okay. Only after the war, did I begin to think about the human effects of bombing. What I find impressive about Howard Zinn's idea is the preparation that went into it, because he wasn't just saying this flippantly. He had spent more than half of a century thinking about his ideas. Howard Zinn did what true heroes do. He faced himself honestly and squarely, and he made peace in the world in the most profound of ways. I love the way he told the story. He said, later I visited that village. About 10 years after the war, I went to the library that had been destroyed and was now rebuilt. I dug out records of survivors that had been written about the bombing. I spoke to the people who survived and whose family members had died. And they were very bitter about the bombing. Howard then wrote about this experience. These days, writers like Howard Zinn are sometimes hated and sometimes feared by some of us. Hated by those who are not ready for the power of his ideas. Feared by those who are unprepared for his level of compassion and insight. At the same time, others of us are ready for his power and prepared for his compassion. We are ready and prepared, hungry for it even. Through people like Howard Zinn, we know that we are on our way. We have lifted the balancing pole, and we are approaching the edge of things. We've placed both feet on a cable, and we've stepped into the sky. And now we face the clouds of our unknowing, and it's beautiful. God only knows what will happen next, but I have a feeling that we'll be pleasantly surprised. Philip Petit was a tightrope skywalker. He was certainly surprised, and by a little bird, a little dove of peace. I'll close with this story. He says, years ago, I was invited to open the Israel Festival by a high wire walk. I chose to put my wire between the Arab and the Jewish quarters of Jerusalem. I thought it would be incredible if in the middle of the wire I stopped and like a magician, I produced a dove and sent her into the sky as a living symbol of peace. So there were 80,000 people there, and there was tension because all of those people, for the most part, considered each other enemies. So I start the walk, and I stop in the middle, and I make the dove appear, and the people applaud in delight. And then I send the dove of peace up into the azure, into the blue. But the bird, instead of flying away, lands on my head. So I try again. I send the dove into the air, but this time the dove lands on the end of my balancing pole. Instead of admitting that I was improvising because things were going very wrong, I just decided to take a bow. And then I banged my hand against the edge of the balancing pole to dislodge the dove that cannot fly. And this time it lands on the wire behind me, and the entire valley goes crazy. I feel like that dove sometimes, like a bird that cannot fly, and so did Leonard Cohen, if I hear his song correctly. Maybe we all feel that way sometimes, trying our best to fly, trying to find and keep our balance, trying in our own ways to be free. Happy birthday, Howard. I hope it feels good to be 100. Feel free to join us at Silver Lake. We're heading down there after church and we're jumping in. We're going to fall into something beautiful. Maybe so. Blessed be. And amen. Okay, so on the count of 3, we're going to lift our hands up and fall back, okay? Ready?
No.
1, 2, 3!
That was